Hi there, and welcome back to SkyScaleUp Introduction to JavaScript course. And in this lesson, I'm going to show you guys how you can build your own to-do list application. So in this to-do list, I can add an item to a list, I can cross-check an item, I can delete an item. So what I'm going to do here is that, first and foremost, I'm going to add an item to this list. I would come in here and say buy milk. And when I click on this add button, it adds that item to this list. And now when I want to remove an item, I can click on this X and it removes that item. So let's say I went to the gym this morning. So what I would just do is I will click on this hit the gym to cross check that item. And the next, I can also click on this to cross check it, click on this to cross check it. And I can also click on it again to remove that effect. So you can also like remove any list from an item. You can also add list from an item. So this is what we're going to build together in this lesson, and we're going to build it using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So when I go straight to my VS Code, the first thing I need to do is to set up my files. I need to set up my HTML file, my CSS file, and also my JavaScript file. So I will come here and write script.js. Okay, so now in my HTML file, I'm going to set up my document structure. So I'm going to set up the head element, the HTML element, the head element, and the body element. And when I click on go live, you can see that we have a white space, and that's because we have not written anything inside the body element. So what I'm going to do first is to create some elements in between that body element. So I'll first of all start by creating the header part of the to-do list. I'm going to create a header and I'm going to give that header an ID of my div, and I'm going to give it a class of header. And in between it, I am going to create a heading. So this heading is going to hold this text that says to-do list. And below this heading, I'm going to create an input element, and this input element is going to come with a type of text, an ID of my input, and we're going to have a placeholder called title. And below this input element, I'm going to create a span element. So this span element will come with an ID that says add btn, and it's also going to come with a class. And in between this span element, I'm going to type a text that says add. And now when I save my code and I go to my browser, you can see that we have a simple heading, an input, and a add text right here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to create the unordered list section, creating a couple of lists. These lists are going to be the default list. So the first one will be hit the gym, and the second one will be pay bills. The third one is going to be clean the car. The fourth one could be buy groceries. And the fifth one can be read a book. Okay, so now that I've created this list, the next thing I'm going to do is to link my CSS and my JavaScript to this HTML file. So to link my JavaScript to my HTML file, I will first of all place in my script tag, and that script tag is going to come with a source attribute. So in between that double quote, I am going to link this JavaScript file to this HTML file. And to do that, all I need to do is to place my dot forward slash script.js. To link this HTML file, this CSS file to this HTML file, I am going to place in a link element. So I'll come here and write link, and I'm going to link the CSS file to the HTML file. Okay, so the HTML file is up and running and everything is currently working in the HTML file. When I go straight to my browser, you can see that everything is working as expected. Now, the next thing we need to do, style our HTML file. So the first thing we need to do is to style the body. So any style you want to be applied anywhere should be placed in the body. So I'm going to give this a margin of 0 and a max width of 200, let's say 250 pixels. But before this, I'm going to place in a universal styling, and I'm going to give every element a margin of 0 and a padding of 0 by default. Now moving on, I am going to style the heading. So this H2 that you're seeing right here, I will come here and give this H2 a margin of, let's say, 5 pixels. So the next thing I want to style is this input right here. And to style this input, I'm going to select the element by tag name. So I'm going to type input, that's the name of the tag. I'm going to clear all borders. I'm going to give this element a width of, let's say, 75% and a padding of 10 pixels. I'm going to float this element to the left, and the element will come with a font size of 16 pixels. I'm also going to add a box sizing property. Now, when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that everything is coming together. You can see the border of the input. You can see the size of the heading. You can see the length of this input became longer. You can see that the length of the input became longer, and you can see a couple of changes. Now, the next thing we're going to style is the add button. So the next thing we're going to style is this add button right here. I'm going to select this element by a class called add btn, and I will give it a padding of 10 pixels. I will also give it a box sizing property of border box. I'll give it a width of 25%, and I am going to give the element a background of hash D9, D9, D9. So D9, D9, D9 is basically a gray color. As you can see, D9, D9, this is the color that we're going to get. So the text right inside that span element is going to have a gray color, but in a darker shade. So that's hash 555. I'll float this element to the left, and I will align the text of this element to the center. So the element is going to come with a font size of 16 pixels, and we're going to give the cursor of this element a pointer. Then after that, we're going to give this element some transitions. Now, once I save my code and I go straight to my browser, so once I refresh, you can see the style of this add btn button. Now moving on, the next thing I would love to style is this header, this container element that is holding everything. Header, I'm going to go to my CSS and In my CSS, I am going to select the header, my class name. So I'm going to give it a background color. I'm going to give it a green background color. So it's going to come with a hash 00 B8. Then after that, I'm going to give it a padding of 30 pixels left and right, 30 pixels top and bottom, 40 pixels left and right. Then after that, the element will come with a color of white, and the text in that header element will be aligned to the center. So I will come here and align the text to the center. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the background color of the header. You can see the text that is being aligned to the center and every other element that is being aligned to the center. Now moving on, I want to style every element that comes after the header element. So I will give that element a content of, well, an empty string. I'm going to create the element in form of a table display. Then after that, I will clear both. And when I go straight to my browser, you can see that the header element looks better now. Okay, so I can type in a couple of texts that says buy milk. Although this is not fully functional, but you can see that we have gone a long way. Moving on, the next element we want to style is the unordered list. So the first thing we need to make sure is that we need to style the list items. Yeah. So first and foremost, I'm going to select the element by tag name and I'm going to give it a margin of 0. I'm also going to give it a padding of 0. So below that, I would target every list that is inside this unordered list. So what I mean is I want to style all these things that is inside this element. So I will give all of them a pointer, a cursor pointer, and I'll position this element to be relative. Then after that, I'm going to give the element a padding of 12 pixels, 8 pixels, 12 pixels, and now below that, I am going to set a background of gray. Then after that, I am going to give this element a font size of 18 pixels. And the element is going to come with the transition property of 0.2 seconds. So we're going to do a couple of property here. So WebKit-user select. So what that means is that these styles are going to be applied to this browser. So the WebKit, the mouse, the MS, they're all styles that are applicable for browsers, styles that should be used for browsers, just in case some browsers don't allow those styles. So what I'm going to do here is that I am going to specify another user select. So the reason for this user select is to style how you want the selection of an element to be. So for me, I don't want this element to be selected. So that's why I'm going to place user select. You can see that this element cannot be selected. If I try to select this one, it's selected, like I'm selecting it easily, but these ones cannot be selected. Now going back to my VS Code, I am also going to do this for another browser, and user dash select, then after that user select none. So once I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that everything now is coming together and is looking good. So once I go back to my VS Code, the next thing I'm going to do is to the elements is to add more styles to that list element. So I am going to give every odd child a background color of, then below that, then after that, I'm also going to add the style to this list element when it's hovered. So I'm going to give this a background color of hashtag DDD. So when I hover on that element, it's going to give us this background color. So let me just show you. So once I hover on it, you can see that we have a dark gray background color. Okay, now moving on, I am going to style the list element with a class of check. So what I'm talking about is, so I'm going to style a list element with a class of check. But for this to work, I would have to like add a check class somewhere around here. So I'll just come in here and give this element a class of checked. Once I save it and I go back to my CSS, all I'm going to do here is that I am I'm now going to style this element. So I'm going to give this element a background color of hash 888. Then after that, I'm going to give this element a color of hash FFF. And after that, the element will come with a text decoration of line through. Like when I check that element, a line will go through that element. So as you can see, we have a line through and a background color. I'm also going to style the checked element, but this time I am going to style and create an element before this check element. So the content, it's going to be empty, and that element I'm about to create in CSS will have a position, an absolute positioning, and it's going to come with a border color of white, and is also going to come with a border style of solid. So the element can also come with a border width, and we can have a top property, a left property, a transform property. We're going to rotate this element in 45 degrees. Then after that, we're going to have a height of about 15 pixels. And our element is going to come with a width. So let me just give it 7 pixels. So when I save my code and I go straight to my browser, not a lot of change happened, but you'll see some change later on as we continue working on the project. So moving on, the next element I'm going to style is going to be the close element. So the next element I'm going to style is going to be the close element. So we don't have that in our HTML, although it's something that we're going to create in our JavaScript. So I will come here and give this element an absolute positioning, and I will position this element to the right. So I will also position it to the top, and the element is going to have a padding of about 12 pixels, 16 pixels, 12 pixels, and just give this one 16 pixels. So when I hover on this element, it should give me a background color of red. So I'm going to use a color code here. That's hash F44336. So I'm also going to have a color of white, so like a white color. Okay, so moving on, we're going to have a header. So that's basically it. So when I save my code and I go straight to my browser, you can see that everything is put in place. So everything is put in place. So the next thing we need to focus on is on our JavaScript, because as you can see, nothing that much is really going on here. So the HTML and the CSS are set up. One more thing we need to do is to add some styles to this button. So when I hover on this button, at least the background color should change. So I'll be going straight to my CSS, and one thing I'm going to do is to add a hover property. So I'll come in here and say add button dash hover, and I'm going to give it a background color. Now when I save my code and I go straight to my browser, you can see that when I hover on it, it gives us this gray color. So that's it for the HTML and CSS part of this project. As you can see, we have set up our HTML, we have set up our CSS. All that is left is setting up the JavaScript. If you could remember, in our HTML and CSS section, we're able to create the structure of our to-do list app, and we're also able to style our to-do list app. Now the next thing we need to do is to add some more functionalities. So for instance, if I say buy book and I click on this add, it's supposed to add this to this list of items. So I'll be going straight to my VS Code, and the first thing I need to do is to select a couple of elements from our HTML file. So the first element I'm going to select is the add button element, and I'm going to get the element by the ID, and I'm going to add btn. Yeah, so basically what I'm doing here is that I'm trying to get these elements with this ID. I'm trying to get any element in my HTML document with an ID of add btn. So when I go to my HTML document, I can see that this is the element that I'm trying to get. So after that, I am going to create another, I'm going to select another element, and this element will allow us to get all our list items. So I'm going to get element by tag name this time. So I want to get element by tag name, and I'm looking forward to get all the list elements right here. Moving on, I am going to create a variable, and I will set up a for loop. And this for loop that I'm setting up right now is responsible for looping through this element right here and giving us a couple of outputs for each repetition. So what I'm going to do is, if you could remember the for loop syntax, we have I is equals to 0, I is lesser than my node list dot length, and then I plus plus. And for each repetition, I want to create a span element directly from my JavaScript. So let me just make this lowercase. Let me also make this lowercase. And I'm also going to create a text node. So the span element is going to come with a class name of close. So basically, I'm going to make use of this close class name that you have right here. I'm making use of it in my JavaScript. After that, we're going to add or append this text node right here directly inside the span element. So basically the text that falls inside the element. So moving on, I will say my node list I the append child is equals to span. So once the element has been created and the text has been created and it's appended to the span, I'm going to now append the entire document directly inside this node list, which is this element by tag name that I just got. So just in case you're curious, if I log this node list to the console, let's say console.log my node list. Once I save it and go straight to my browser, you can see that we have an array of 5 items, and each of these items have their own methods, and they have methods that allow you to like manipulate that item. So when I save my code and I go straight to my browser, first of all, let me clear out this console.log. When I go straight to my browser, you can see that everything is the same the way we left it. The next thing we're going to do now is to work on our close button. So I can come here and create a variable called close, and I am going to assign this to this variable, to the close variable. So it's going to be document.getElement by class name. So document.getElement by class name, and that I want to select has a class name called close. So after that, I will create a variable called I, then I'll set up another for loop. So for I is equals to 0, I is lesser than close dot length I plus plus. So let me just make this a variable, and so when I save my code and right in between the for loop, I am going to write a logic that says whenever I click on that close icon, so when I click on the close button, it's going to like run a function for us. So the function that it's going to run for us is that it's going to first and foremost get the parent element of that item that I clicked on. And once the parent element has been gotten, it's going to change the display property of that element to false. So I will come here and say this dot parent element, and below that I will say div dot style dot display is equals to none. Now moving on, the next thing we're going to do is to work on this list section. So we're going to work on this list section, and whenever I click on an item, that item should be checked. So I can come here and say document.query selector. I'm selecting the unordered list. Then after selecting the unordered list, I am going to add an event listener. I'm going to give it an on-click event, and when I click on each item, it's going to run a function for us. So if event, so basically E here, so I'm going to place E here. So basically the E here, the E I'm passing here is just an argument. This E right here basically describes the type of event. Dot tag name is equals to, so I'm checking if is equals to li, but if it's equals to li, it should do this. So once all of that is done, by the time I save my code and I go straight to my browser, so we just made some little adjustment to our code. What I did was I made this close instead of close. So whatever variable you are declaring here should also be the same thing here, here, and yeah. So if you are declaring a variable one place, always make sure that it's the same everywhere. For instance, like if I had a D, right, my logic is not going to work at all. So as you can see, it's not working. So let me just save my code, and I'll show you guys the result of what we have been coding so far. So I will go straight to my browser, and when I click on this, you can see that I'm clearing out the items. So when I click on it, you can see that I'm clearing out the items. Everything is being cleared out for us. So the next thing I'm going to test is this list section. So after writing the code, it's expected that when I click on this item, there should be it should strike through, like there should be a line that is going to strike through that list, just like this. But it's not working at the moment, so let me just go straight to my VS Code and see where the problem is coming from. So this should be class list, not class name. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser and I click on it, you can see that we can actually strike through this text. We can delete them. So now the next thing that we're going to do is going to be adding of items. We have not started this functionality yet, but the way it's going to work is when I type something that says buy bread and I click on this add button, it should add this item to this list. So let's go straight to our VS Code and work on it. Now, before we do anything, let's make sure that we have selected this element from our HTML document. And now what we're going to do now is that we're going to add an event listener that is going to listen for a click event. And after that, we're going to place in a function. Okay, so the function we're going to create can come with a name that says new element. In between that function, that is where we're going to write all our logic. So what I want to do first of all is I want to create a new list element. So I will come here and create element, and this is li. Then below that, I am going to get the value of my input. So I'm going to get the value of this input right here. So I'm going to get the value of my input, and I'll create a variable called input value, and I'm going to get this element that says my input. So I'm going to get the value of the element. So I'm talking about this value right here. I'm talking about this value. I'm going to get this value inside this element. Now after that, I'm going to create another variable, and that variable will be assigned to a couple of methods. So what I want to do here is that I want to create a text node, and I want to append this text node directly inside this list element. So below that, I'm going to write some logic that says that if input value, so let's say if the input value was empty, it will tell you that you must write something. So you must write something. But if it's not empty, then it's going to append the entire list in the unordered list element. So I will come in here and I will get the element by ID, and this will be my UL. Let me check the ID that I gave it. So let me just give it an ID called my UL, and let me save it. So below that, I'm going to select a couple of elements. So document.get element by ID, my input dot value is equals to an empty string. So what I'm trying to do here is that when I click on that add button, that button that will add the item to the list, is expected to create an li element, and is expected to add text inside that list element. So this logic right here is saying that if this input value, basically if the text inside this input box was empty, it's going to send us an error message that says you must write something. Else, it's going to do the needful and it's going to add this list element directly inside this unordered list element. So it's going to add it as a new item. Now, whenever I click on that button and the list item has been added, it will not clear the value that is inside this input. So whatever value that is inside this input is going to clear it, and we're not going to see any text or any value again. So before I proceed, let me just do some experiment. So first, I'm going to add an item, and I will just type buy beans and rice. And when I click on this button, it adds that item to the list and it clears the text here. So once I've bought beans and rice, I can click on it to clear it. And by the end of the day, if I want to clear out this entire list, I can always click on this X. Now, the reason why this one doesn't come with an X, that's because we haven't added it yet. I am going to create a variable called span, and I am going to assign it to this method. So document.create element. Then I'm going to create a text. So what I'm doing right here is exactly what I am doing right here. All right, you can always copy the codes and paste it, but for me, I'll be coding it one step at a time. So I will come in here and write document dot create text node. So I'll place my /u00d7. Then below that, I will come in here and say span dot class name. So I want to use this closed class name that I created in my CSS file. Then after that, I am going to append it. So that will be span.append child, then txt. So basically what I'm appending is this text element right here, this text node right here. And I am going to append everything inside the list element. So once it has been appended, I will create a for loop. So once it has been appended, I will now save my code and go straight to my browser. So when I go straight to my browser, I can add a new item that says read a book. Okay, read a book is already here. Buy jewelries. And when I click on add, you can see that we have an item that is being added. And you can see that we have that X that is being placed right there at the right hand side. So when I click on it, okay, for some reason, it's not working at the moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to my code and check out and see where the problem is coming from. The next thing I'm going to do, I just forgot that I didn't add a for loop. So the for loop is what I'm going to add. So this for loop that I'm adding, it allows us to close that item. So make sure that whenever you're adding a for loop, it has to be added directly inside this function right here. So I will come here and say for loop dot length I plus plus. If close I dot on click. So whenever I click on each and every one of these items, it's going to call this function for us. So it will call this function, and what it's going to do is that it's going to move up to the parent element, and after moving up to the parent element, it would remove the entire element from the parent down to the child. So I'll come here and say diff.style.display is equals to none. So I believe that was the reason why that X button was not working. So when I go straight to my browser and I refresh, let's say I type a new item that says clean or do laundry, or let's say I type any item that says watch, clean, the home. When I add it, let me add another item again. So the next item that I'm going to add could be buy drinks. And when I click on this add button, it adds that item. Now let me check and see if I can remove the item. Okay, so the item can be removed. As you can see right here, I can remove the item. So once I've bought the drinks, I will now check this item. Then after checking the item, I can then click on this X icon right here to remove the item from my list, as you can see right here. So currently I removed all the items and you can see that my list is empty at the moment. So that is how you can create a simple to-do list app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the codes are going to be in the contents down below, and if you don't understand what happened, you can always go straight to the community and ask your questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.